I remember the first time where I really felt different. I was only 3 or 4 years old, and I was on my first preschool play date. Now, from an outside eye looking in, you wouldn't think anything was out of the ordinary on this play date. The mother brought us fresh fruit. I played with my friend. Her brother was kind to us. It was a pretty typical play date. But for me, it was life changing. And the reason is because when I was on this play date, I really felt the sense of peace that was in this little girl's house. And this was something that felt really foreign to me. And the reason is because in my home, I grew up in a home where my father was both bipolar and schizophrenic. And my dad was an amazing, brilliant, talented, funny, charming, charismatic man. But his mental illness meant that he often had an altered sense of reality and he experienced very unpredictable mood swings. So, my home as a child could often feel very chaotic and unstable and unpredictable. So, when I felt what it was like to be in this other little girl's house, it really gave me a sense of awareness of how different that my own upbringing was. And it was the first time that I realized that I really felt like I needed to not talk about my own home life, that my life was something that I should keep a secret and because of how different I felt from her and from this experience. So I went on as a child, and when I was very young, um, from a very young age, I was with my father during times where he would have episodes with his mental illness. And even though I was a very young child, I knew that sometimes when he was experiencing things, that he was hearing voices or he was seeing visions that um, I knew were not reality, that I still needed to respect that. So, as a young child with my father, it was really my first experience of being a safe space. And I would be a safe space for my dad in the way that I would sit with him when he was going through these things. And when he was hearing things or experiencing things that I knew were not reality, I also, even though I was so young, had a way of knowing that what he was experiencing was very real to him. So I would sit with him through that and really try to be someone who is a safe space to make him feel seen and heard and valued and respected and understood, even though he was experiencing something that other people were not. So being there for my dad in that sense really gave me a unique lens um, and a sense of empathy that was very, very high. So I found that when I would go out into the world and speak to others, whether it was schoolmates or teachers or friends, I had a way of being able to see people and really making them feel seen and heard and valued and respected. And I used this skill to be my own safe space. And what I mean by that is when I showed up for others in this way and made them feel good and valued and respected, it would mean that they wanted me around, because when you make people feel good, it they want you around, right? So I would get all of the invitations. I would get invitations to go eat at friend's house or have a sleepover or be invited in different spaces. So it was my way as a child really of being a safe space for myself, because I would get my basic needs met in the way that I would show up for others. So this was something that really got me in spaces, and as I said, helped me to have my basic needs met. And I learned pretty early on from watching the way that the world reacted to my father that there was a pretty big stigma around mental illness and a lot of shame around it. I would see when we would be out in public with my father how people would react. And sometimes he was able to sort of have a mask on and, present in a way that people would think is normal behavior. And other days, if he was struggling, he wasn't able to hide the behaviors and the symptoms that would come from his mental illness. Or he would be presenting side effects from the many medications that he had to take to manage his mental illness. And as I watched the way that the world reacted to my father in different situations, it was hard to watch as a child because I saw how people with mental illness sometimes aren't even really treated as full people. There would be many times where my dad would be treated with disrespect or not taken seriously out in the world. And those were lessons that I learned without being directly taught, that having a mental illness or presenting behaviors is something that is not accepted often out in the world. So the other lesson that I learned on a daily basis, constantly, all day long, from everyone around me, is that being crazy is something that no one wanted to be. And the way that I would hear this all day long is in people's language. I could hear a teacher say something like, "Stop being crazy, everyone. You're going to lose recess today." Or I could hear a very good friend of mine talk about someone and be like, "Oh, I really don't like that girl. She's a psycho." And I would hear this language from children and adults throughout my life. And you would hear this in pop culture through music or books or TV or movies. The language was all the same. It was very clear that being crazy or insane or nuts or psycho was something that no one wanted to be. No one wanted to be that, or it was always put in a negative connotation. So this made me feel like it was not safe to share my truth as a child. So I kept that part of my life a secret as much and as often as I could. And when you have a secret like that, like your whole basically home life and existence is a secret, it weighs on you heavy. And not only does it weigh on you heavily, but you have to upkeep that secret, which is exhausting. When you're trying to maintain a secret and upkeep it, whether you want to or not, you end up having to lie your way through situations. And I found myself as a child having to lie to my friends, my teachers, different people in my life, just to maintain, the secret and to have them not find out, what my actual lived experience was. So there's also a layer when you are a parent with a severe mental illness, that sometimes the reality of that mental illness and the responsibility of parenting don't always pair well. And there were times where, my dad, it was his turn to pick me up somewhere and he would forget, or he would be sleeping because of his medication, and I would be left somewhere. And of course, I'm then lying to all the adults around me about who's supposed to pick me up or where I'm supposed to be. And it didn't feel good. I think the more that you carry a secret and have to maintain it, the more it really weighs on you. So, what I would do um, to be a safe space for myself is, I would continue to kind of hone my skills in finding safety in other people. And I learned how to really scan an environment and find the people in that environment that are safe. And I think there's an important thing to highlight is that we often teach children that, strangers and people that we don't know are dangerous. Stranger danger is something that we teach, and we teach kids how to look for people who are bad or scary. But what we don't teach kids is how to look for people who feel safe, or people who are good in the world. And that my ability to kind of look around and find the qualities in people that made them feel safe is really something that saved me as a child. And it also helped me hone my own ability to be safe. And I think another saying that we often um, hear is, when people show you who they are, believe them. And when we hear that, it's usually referring to when people show you their bad qualities, right? When people show you things about them that you shouldn't trust, or you shouldn't, um, associate with those person. But I think, we also need to look at the other side of that. When people show you who they are, when they show you that they are trustworthy, that they do provide comfort, that they are solid, golden people who can help you, I think we also need to believe that. So when people show you who they are, believe them in that sense too. And knowing how to look for the good in others. So this is something that I did, really my whole life. And when I've talked before about how to help children identify safe spaces and how to teach children how to be safe spaces in the world. And there's three things really that you want to look for in a safe space person, or be when you're trying to be a safe space for someone. And that is comfort. You are looking for people who make you feel comfort effortlessly. Um, and this is done by, having non-judgment and open-minded kindness. And the other thing that you want to look for is acknowledgement. Who acknowledges you in a way where they really see you, where they value you, appreciate you, they see you for who you are. That's another quality of someone who is a safe space. And then also, do they make you feel like you're a member of their team? Does someone make you feel like you belong? So those are all qualities of safe space people when you are looking to find one, or you are showing up in the world as one yourself. And I really believe, after growing up in the kind of situation where I had so much chaos in my life, I know that if you show up in a way where you want to have open-minded kindness and you are looking to be a safer space in the world, it makes a difference. And think about all the big world problems that we face. And if everyone really made this conscious effort to show up for one another as a safe space, what that would look like. So I went through my childhood navigating it, doing, these things to kind of get myself in situations where I felt safe. And by the time I got to high school, I was really good at making friends and being the kind of person who I could go in the lunchroom and I could sit at any table. I had people, I was a chameleon. I could really kind of fit in anywhere. And it was around this time in the middle of high school where I was working with one of my father's social workers, and things had gotten really, really hard at home. And I remember the social worker saying to me, listen, you're going to be 18, and until you're 18, we can sort of help and support. And, my dad was not going to be living in my home for a little while at that point. But they said, you really need to start making a plan for yourself. And, I was like 15 years old at the time. And so I thought, okay, I need to make a plan for myself. And I started working as soon as I could. At age 14, I went out and got my work permit. My first job was working on a farm in pretty horrible conditions, to be honest. As a 14-year-old, I worked alongside some other teenage boys who, really said things to us that was sexual harassment. And it was not a good situation. We did not have adult supervision, but that was my first work experience. And from there, I went on to work many places. I would babysit, I would work at a pharmacy, and I was saving money to get a car. Because to me, having a car was my first little step of freedom. Once I had a car, I could also work more. It kind of expanded my capacity to earn. So I was able to get to the point where I could leave home at 17. And it was interesting because when I did leave home, my dad did come back. And I really had a very strong relationship with my dad. As I said, I was really a sort of safe space and a sounding board for him. So it was really kind of a bittersweet situation. And I left and was able to have an apartment with one of my best friends, and go on to college while working several jobs, and eventually move away from the area where I grew up and move to where I live now, which is in New Haven, Connecticut. And I left and moved with my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband. And when we got here, I really had felt like, wow, I sort of made it out of my situation, and I went to college, and here I am, sort of creating this new life for myself. And once I started doing that, I realized that I had a lot of anger that I had never dealt with. Just anger from my situation, and anger from, not having certain things as a child and having to fight so hard, and anger from carrying that secret for so long, which I was still carrying at the time. So I ended up going to a martial arts school, and I started martial arts to kind of get out my anger and also continue to be a safe space for myself. This was a way where I had control sort of my physical safety. And I learned a lot during that time that I was a martial artist. And the statistics are that 1 in 100 people go on to get their black belt when they start any martial arts. And I did it. And this is important to my story because once I believed that I could do that, and I put in the work to make it happen, and I became that 1 in 100 who became a black belt, I really tucked that in my back pocket and was like, you know what? If I can do that, I was not an athletic kid. This was something I worked really hard to do. If I could be 1 in 100 once, this means that whatever I want to do from here on out, I've already been that 1 in 100. Like, I can do big things, and that was really the first sense of believing myself in a new way. So I, built a life around that time that was very, very different than the way I grew up. I built a life that really valued my peace was so important to me. And I went from that chaotic situation where, I really wanted to have an environment where I woke up every day and just had so much gratitude for my peace. So my boyfriend, like I said, that I'd moved with, who's now my husband, we ended up getting engaged, and we bought a little house near the water and sort of built a very peaceful life. Another thing that has always helped me has been music. He's a musician. A lot of my friends are musicians. I had some time where I was working in radio, and I had sort of all these coping mechanisms, but everything came to a little bit of a halt when the pandemic started. Because even though I had worked really hard to become a teacher, I was teaching kids, and I was living in this little house by the water, and sort of living a peaceful life. And I ended up also having my son, which took honestly a lot of courage for me, because I think I had an ingrained fear that mental illness could be something that ran in my family. I was always afraid that something would happen to me. I think for a long time, as a young person, I was waiting for the ball to drop to see if I had that in me. And I was worried about passing that down to my child, or would I not have the parenting skills because of how I grew up. So I had my son, and here we were in this peaceful life. And when the pandemic hit, I had to leave the teaching job that I had been at for 12 years. And this is a situation where I had been a teacher for even longer than that. And I had used all of my skills of being a safe space with my kids and teaching. I used to look at my room full of students and I knew there was some like me that had a secret. And I would treat all of them with the kind of open-minded kindness and non-judgment and love that I knew I needed as a kid. So teaching was very important to me. And when the pandemic hit, my school went back in person, and my son was starting kindergarten at a school that was fully remote. And I had to leave my in-person teaching job. And leaving that felt like leaving a big sense of my purpose. It was really tough to walk away from that. And I found myself very triggered because suddenly I not only had a loss of my job and what felt like my purpose, but I also lost my income and some of the stability. My family went from two incomes to one income. There were a lot of question marks. And I found that being home during that time in the pandemic made me feel a lot like I did when I was a kid, when everything was out of control and I really didn't have a lot of options. It was very triggering. And I felt a lot of that secret that was shoved so far down start to kind of push up. And I knew that I needed to tell my story. I needed to let this go and let this part of me come out, because it was, even though I had worked so hard to create all this peace around me, that secret was still festering. And I didn't realize how much of it I was still carrying and holding on to. So I told my story to one of my closest, dearest friends. And around that time, I also went to a therapist for the first time in my life to unpack some of that trauma. And while I was home doing that, I ended up kind of on a whim to do something for myself, even though our resources were down. I took some holiday money and I signed up for a writing course online, just as something, have something for myself. We were doing remote learning, and I signed up to do this. And I ended up not knowing what I was going to write about. Very shortly after being in the course, I woke up one morning and had a whole story of a children's book in my head. And I had been watching during the pandemic how much children had been affected between my friends' children, my own son, and watching all of the children online in his class. And I thought, oh my goodness, there are children right now who are home who had the kind of life that I did. And even for those children who don't, this isolation and being away from your friends, it's so heavy. And I knew that not only from my life experience, but from being a teacher for so many years, especially I taught pre-K for 12 years, which is, I always say, a roller coaster time of feelings. I knew that I had skills that I could help kids. But I was at home in my basement doing kindergarten with my son. So how can I help them? So I woke up with this story in my head about a wolf pup, because wolves are pack animals, and the members of their pack are very essential. They're social creatures, just like we are. And this wolf pup was separated from the members of his pack, just like we were. So I had this idea, and I was like, I really think this story could help kids. I had no idea how to write a book, not a clue of how to write and publish a book. And so what I really wanted is to take my skills of being a safe space and put it in a book for children, so that children would have a tangible safe space that they could use to help them with everything that they had been through. So the same friend that I told my life story to, the day that I had the idea for this story, I called her up and we went on a walk. And as we're walking, her and I'm telling her the story and how I want to help kids. Now I have no idea how I'm going to figure out how to do it, but I believe that I can do it the same way that I believed that I could get my black belt. And we stumbled upon this gorgeous writing desk in the street, and we both laughed. Because here was a physical object right there to help me achieve this dream. And she said, "Do you have somewhere to write at home?" And I said, "No." So we loaded up the desk and brought it home. And that was really the beginning of me taking that writing course, which is also a self-publishing course, and learning how to go about all of the steps to make my book happen. And while I'm in this writing course, my mentor and teacher of the course, who also became a friend, I wanted to learn more about her because I thought she was amazing. And I watched her TEDx talk. And for the first time in my entire life as a 39-year-old, I heard someone else say that they had a schizophrenic parent. And I realized how much I needed to hear that and how I had no idea that I needed to hear that this was someone else's shared experience and that I wasn't alone. So from that moment on, it really changed my life. It really set me free. It cracked me open in a way that I had no idea that I needed to experience. As time went on and I talked to this mentor, she ended up encouraging me to tell my story on a TEDx stage and coached and mentored me through that process, and I did it. So I went from, in a very short time, never having told my story of my childhood to standing on a global stage and sharing it. And the reason I believe that is so important is in my research, I found out that kids who grew up like I did have a very high risk for suicide. And it's really time that we work together to end the shame, the stigma, and the secrecy surrounding having a mental illness or loving someone who does. And I really believe that the way we do that is to talk about it. I think mental health should be talked about, respected the same way that physical health is. So I'm so grateful for this opportunity to be able to share my story because I know that there's people out there who have had a similar shared experience and they haven't talked about it because it doesn't feel safe to talk about it when there is such a stigma. And I've found that since I have spoken about it publicly, that people I even knew in my own life have come forward to me and said, you know, this was my experience too. And this was the first time that I ever heard someone talk about it. And I was able to talk about and process these parts of my life with them in a really beautiful way that never would have happened if I wasn't brave enough to share my story and draw my courage from someone else sharing their story. So another way we can really show up for each other as a safe space is to not only share our stories, but to be open to other people sharing their stories and their really listening with an open mind and open heart and non-judgment. So I have been since speaking and since writing my book. So the story that I had that I then worked to turn into a book has been also an amazing experience. I learned about traditional publishing and getting an agent and going that route. And someone told me that's going to take you 2 years. And I said, no way. I need my book out for kids as soon as possible. So I learned the self publishing process and I founded my publishing company, Mama Wolf Publishing, and worked with an illustrator, had my finished book, and was so excited and actually ran out of funding for the book. I then had to run a Kickstarter. And at that point, I had almost no, I don't think I had no social media. And again, you know, trying to show up in the world as a safe space, I started talking to parents and teachers and child therapists about kids' experience during the pandemic and how much there was a need for a tool to teach kids how to manage these big feelings and really feel empowered. So as I was talking to all these people and getting them to believe in this dream of having this book exist, I created a little bit of a social media following and I actually ended up that summer driving on, going on a little tour across the country and meeting people and getting to read to kids. Sometimes it would be, in a public park, I would read to kids. And I didn't even have a book yet, but I had the printed pages of my finished book in a binder. And my son encouraged me to bring that binder everywhere we went. And so we would sort of show up as a mobile safe space. And we would bring the story and we would read it to kids, and I would see how they would connect with it. And as more and more people, got on board with this story, I was able to run a Kickstarter and fund the book in 7 hours, which is amazing. So on the very first day, 7 hours into the Kickstarter, I had funding for this book. So I was able to, from start to finish, January 2021 to September 2021, have my book finished and have it available as a safe space for kids. And I am going to read you that story today because I want to end on a very high positive note. I want you all to feel good and know that when you start out in life from a place that is dark and you feel like, I know a lot of my life, I didn't feel like I belonged places. There was a sense that I didn't belong. Sometimes the things that you gain from your dark, trying times and those skills are really what become your own superpower. In my book, I call it, magic. But those things that, those skills, like that deep sense of empathy and the way that I'm able to look at people and see their unique, amazing talents and qualities and cheer them on and hold up a mirror and, make people feel good, which at first was a survival skill. And then it became who I am. I'm really not able to see people shining bright and doing amazing things without telling them. So I am going to read you my children's book. Before I do that, I want to tell you that I mentioned before that music was also a really healing thing for me. I'm starting to work on a project of mindset coaching. Recently started doing an online program for music industry essentials at NYU. And I'm going to be taking my skills from life, from being an educator, and from being, everybody's hype woman is what everyone calls me, and using the skills that I have that get people to really see their own shine and sort of shepherd them back to themselves so they can really see and use their unique skills. And that's something that I'm working on. It's a very new idea, but I wanted to share it in this space because I know I've heard Lisa say this, and I believe it to be true too, that you really have to speak what you want into the, out into the open, and you speak it into existence. So that's something very new that I'm working on. I really hope to be soon working with musicians and artists to help them feel their best. So I'm going to now read you my book, A Wolf Named Elvis. And this is the true story of me and my son being home during our time in the pandemic. Meet Elvis. Elvis is a soulful, curious, creative, and wonderfully wise wolf pup. Elvis loves many things, but he especially loves playing with his friends. After all, wolves are pack animals. Being together is natural. Being together just feels good. Being together feels like sunshine and superheroes. Elvis also loves his mama wolf so much. She is always there for him when he needs her. One day, Mama Wolf tells Elvis that there's a new kind of sickness going around. The sickness means that he cannot see the friends in his pack. Elvis felt like the world stopped. How could he be a wolf without the friends in his pack? Elvis had so many enormous feelings. He felt sad. He felt angry. He felt scared. He felt out of control. The enormous feelings just kept coming until he yelled, "Mama, I feel so many things. I want it to stop. I feel all mixed up. The big feelings are too much. This feels so hard." Elvis felt like he was wearing a backpack of boulders. Mama Wolf gave Elvis a giant wolf hug. "We can do hard things," she said. Then she reached into her back pocket to give him some of her magic. The magic made Elvis feel better on the spot. "Elvis, you must feel your big feelings, even when they hurt. All feelings deserve respect. Once you've felt those feelings, it is time to flip your own script. You must learn how to create magic for your own back pocket," said Mama Wolf. "But how?" asked Elvis. Everything felt different since the sickness came. Instead of going to school with his friends, Elvis saw them on a screen. He was always stuck home in his den with his mama and Papa Wolf. This made him feel so frustrated. Elvis thought, "Feel my feelings, I can do hard things, flip my script, and make magic." So he tried. When he felt sad, he let the sadness wash over him. Then he began to play music. Music fed his soul and filled him with warm feelings. He felt his sadness start to shrink away. When he felt angry, he let the anger bubble up like a storm. Then he sat down to create some art. He drew his anger into a fierce dragon, and he felt himself, little by little, start to feel calm. When his body felt out of control and he was bouncing off the walls of his den, he went out into nature. He always felt so free in nature. He flew with the birds, he climbed trees, he chased sunsets. When he felt like he needed to escape, he remembered that his mama wolf had taught him how to read. Books helped Elvis escape to many places in his mind. Books could take him anywhere. When he felt lonely, he would call or write letters to his friends. Sometimes every pup in the pack would howl to each other outside their dens. They all felt better knowing that they were all howling under the same sky. When he felt like giving up, he remembered how he had learned to have perseverance when he swung a bat, kicked a ball into the goal, dove off the diving board, or landed a new trick. When he felt like things were unfair, he made a list of his ideas for change. He created signs and prepared to go out and howl for what was right. Elvis thought about all of his big feelings and all of the ways that he could help himself feel better. "Mama," said Elvis, "when my big feelings came to visit, I felt them." "I'm so proud of you, Elvis. Feeling your feelings is important," said Mama Wolf. "And Mama, I did a lot of things to help me flip my script." "Yes, you did, Elvis," said Mama Wolf. "Mama, I think I found magic for my back pocket," Elvis exclaimed excitedly. Elvis held his magic high in the air and did a little happy dance. Then suddenly he stopped. "But Mama," he said, "what if I don't have any pockets?" Mama Wolf smiled wisely and said, "Elvis, the real magic you create lives inside you, in your heart. It's always with you." Elvis felt the magic glowing inside his heart. His light was so bright. "I feel it, I feel it. I can make my own magic. I can make my own glow." Elvis was shining like a diamond. And then in the back of my book, I write a letter to kids about how they all have their own magic within them. And then there are photos showing all the things that happened in the book that happened for us during our time in the pandemic. Thank you for listening to that story and listening to my story. It's so important. I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to hear everyone's stories during this conference. It really does not only set the person free who's telling the story, but really lets us all know that we're not alone. This whole conference and whole experience is the definition of a safe space. So thank you so much.